Not everyone holds swords the same way, and not everyone's right or wrong. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that when I look at source material, some sources tell you to hold the sword a certain way, some sources criticise the design of certain hilts for certain reasons, and I don't always agree with these historical sources. Now, I'm not a historical swordsman. In other words, I'm not from history. Not yet. I will be one day. We all will. But the fact is I have been using swords, at least not to kill people so far, but I have been using swords very regularly for 20 years of my life. That's quite a long time. That's actually longer than some of the people who wrote some of the sources we read. And, you know, not to say this in an egotistical way, but I probably use swords a lot more and probably more competent with some swords than some of the people writing some of these sources we read. And the fact is that I don't always agree with them. That's not to say that they were wrong or they were incompetent or anything like this. It's just really to say that opinions vary. If we look at a sword like the Langmesser, there is no one way to grip it. It's actually one of the most versatile swords from history. Now, not to say that all of these options are necessarily historical or recommended in the sources, but with such a long grip like that, with no enclosed basket hilt or knuckle bow or anything like that, it does give you a practically unlimited number of options for how you could hold this blooming thing. And you know, the options that we do see in the sources are a simple hammer grip. We see it something more like a handshake grip. We see it with a thumb up grip. I'm pretty sure there's one option where we see it held right the way down at the bottom, cast out to get some extra length. Whether it's shown or not, you can certainly do that, and I certainly would in sparring. If you want to get someone in the leg, well, why not buy yourself about 4 extra inches and hit them in the kneecap when they think they're out of distance. So there's all sorts of different options to how you hold this. You could, with a Langmesser, put 2 hands on it. Now, this is not really shown. It might be shown in some of the historical artwork at some point. But you can use this kind of like a katana or a wakizashi, and gripped two-handed, that's kind of what a Langmesser kind of becomes. So there's all sorts of, you know, and clearly we've also talked about reverse grips, double reverse grips, all sorts of, you know, all sorts of weird and wacky, obviously half sword. There's so many different ways you could hold this object. But some historical sources say you must grip the sword like this, don't do it like that. Well, you have to remember with history, if someone tells you not to do something, that means that someone does it the way they told you not to do it, because otherwise they wouldn't bother telling you not to do it. If someone had never in front of their eyes done it that way, they probably wouldn't have thought to put into their book, oh, don't do it that way. I saw Fred putting his thumb up the back of his messer. Don't do that because it makes you more likely to be disarmed. Yeah, that's true. It also helps with edge alignment and reach and speed and other kinds of things. So there's always opinion. And when we're dealing with historical sources, you have to remember that yes, history, if we're studying historical fencing, rather than just making up modern sci-fi fencing, if we're studying historical fencing, then the history, in a sense, comes first. But thankfully, certainly with 19th century sources, and I would say with 16th, 17th century, everything after the 15th century, basically, we've got so many opinions written down that whatever you find for one person's opinion, you can find almost the complete opposite as someone else's opinion. So there's many ways to skin a cat. There's not only one correct way to do things. And within the 19th century sources, one thing that often irks me is sometimes authors who I like everything else they've written, they talk about grip length. Now, you know, we can talk about girth and length until the cows come home, and I often do on this channel. But the fact is that one of the most popular swords of the 18th and 19th centuries was the 1796 light cavalry sabre, and one of the things I have seen it criticised for was the shortness of the hilt. That's right, because the shortness of the hilt apparently forces you to hold it in this manner with the thumb down. Well, does it? I don't really find so. I actually find I can put the thumb up, and I've got a fairly large hand. I mean, in gloves I'm probably like a size large. I'm not extra large, but I've got fairly large hands, certainly, and I'm 6'1", so I'm taller, certainly taller than the average person in the year 1800. And I can put the thumb up if I want to deliver point, give point. If I'm on a horse charging along and I want to thrust someone with my point, yes, I can do it at a crooked angle with my hand in a hammer fist grip or a handshake grip. But equally, I can put the thumb up and deliver point pretty damn well. with this, no problem for me. And in fact, I actually prefer shorter hilts, and this is where I get irked, because in the later 19th century, with most of the sources I study, pick up an example here, this would be described as a really good hilt. Now this is the 1895 pattern backstrap, fully checkered, good, extra friction, less slippy, nice flat surface to put the thumb on, thumb's less likely to slip off. It's a good backstrap, but that is super long. And for me, to my preferences, yeah, I can fence with this, and I used to fence with a Reginier gymnasium sabre, and which had a fairly long grip. But it's not my preference, and you'll notice if you look at the Caviton Easton Mark III sabre, the gymnasium sabre that I designed, that is my sort of pretty much perfect practice weapon, that has a slightly shorter hilt than most of the Reginier gymnasium sabres. And one of the things I personally, there's not a criticism, but I just personally don't like about the Reginier sabres is I find the handle's too long, the grip's too long. And simply because I like to be able to feel the bottom of the guard against my little finger. But there are lots of 19th century sources who say that that's wrong. But equally, even if we're just talking about a thumb up grip, there are two ways of doing it. There's the French method and the Italian method. Pedro, who I refer to often, as many of you, I guess some of you will know Pedro and you would have seen on some of my videos, Pedro holds it in the Italian way and I hold it in the French way. The French way has the thumb much more flat along the back strap and with the little finger right way down the bottom. The Italian method has it up away from the pommel and pushing the end of the thumb against the sabre. So we hold it in two different ways, but we're two different people. We've got two different hands. We're not the same. So one opinion isn't right, one opinion isn't wrong. Just hold it however works best for you. And so it really irks me when you find sources, historical sources that say, oh, the hilt on this model of sword, for example, let's go for a cutlass. The hilt on the regulation cutlass is far too short. It doesn't allow the play of the wrist and the use of the thumb, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it does. It's perfect for me. That hilt is pretty much perfect length. And I'm a 6'1", 21st century person who's bigger than, I'm pretty much always bigger than the person in the 19th century writing those sources. So for me, I like the shorter grip because I like to be able to get my hand right the way down the bottom to the sabre guard. And what's interesting is that French hilts, certainly French infantry hilts, tend to be shorter than a lot of British ones, and I actually like that. I like the snugness of the hilt. And when the hilt is shorter and closer to your hand, it offers better hand protection as well, and I find just allows for better feeling in the sword. So really there we go, just to say that in British sources, and obviously they're the majority of what I study for the 19th century, in British military sources there is a general criticism of shorter grips and an assumption that if a grip is short, then you must grip it in a hammer fist. Well, that's just not true. I can just about get my thumb up on this, it's a bit short. But with the cutlass, which would be regarded as too short of a grip for their ideal design, that's perfect for me. Okay, it's not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily put my thumb up with the cutlass incidentally, but I can do if I want to. Certainly if I want to thrust, then I'd put the thumb up. But cutting, I'd probably keep it down. But there is this assumption that if the grip is short, you must do this. And if you want to put your thumb up, the grip must be long. And it's just not the case. And I find that hilt, for example, overly long. I find it too long for me. And that's a Wilkinson Royal Artillery officer's sword with a fairly long hilt on it. So there we go. Historical opinion must always be acknowledged, regarded, studied, but you don't have to always agree with it. And if you have enough historical sources, like we do for the 19th century, even if we don't for the 15th, you'll often find that one historical source contradicts what another one says. So get your own opinions. You don't always have to follow other people. Even if you like a source in every other regard and it says one bit that you don't like, well, that's fine. Put that aside and disregard that bit. But acknowledge that it's there and don't forget it, okay? So give us a subscribe button down in the corner, give us a like, and I hope to see you back here again for another video on Schola Gladiatoria channel. Cheers, folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks!